Gluttony, the deadly sin of excess. Number 1. Punishment for gluttony, forced to eat rats, snakes, spiders, and toads. Remember, these deadly sins were made in the medieval days, the 6th century. Gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins of Christianity, as defined as overindulgent, overconsumption, anything to the point of waste, particularly food and drink. The sin isn't just about eating too much. It's about an inordinate desire for food and drink that goes beyond nourishment and becomes an obsession. The origin of the term, the word gluttony, originates from the Latin word gutare, which means to swallow or gulp down. The term is also related to the Latin word gula, which means throat or gula. Over time, the word evolved from Old French gluttony and Middle English in its current form. When it was labeled in wine, the concept of gluttony as a vice has ancient roots, appearing in both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, which warned against excess and drunkenness. However, it was formally codified as one of the 7 deadly sins in the 6th century by Pope Gregory I the Great. He created a list of 7 cardinal sins based on the work of 4th century Christian ascetic Evagrius Ponticus. This list was later defined and elaborated by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. It's labeled a deadly sin because it's seen as a lack of self-control that could lead to other more serious sins. By giving a base physical desire for food, one can be led down a path for further immoral behavior. Christian theology posits that gluttony is a sin because it misuses a gift from God, food, by prioritizing personal sensual gratification over its proper purpose, sustenance, and nourishment. Also shows a lack of charity, as an excessive compulsion by the wealthy could be seen as taking from the poor and needy. Christian scholars in theology have written extensively on the sin of gluttony, often defining it not simply as overeating, but a deeper spiritual disorder. Here are some notable quotes and perspectives. St. Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica provides one of the most detailed analyses of gluttony. He defines an inordinate desire of eating and drinking that goes against the order of reason. He outlines the 5 specific ways a sin is committed. Gluttony denotes not any desire of eating and drinking, but an inordinate desire. Now, desire is said to be an inordinate through leaving the order of reason, whereof is evidence that gluttony is sin. He also categorized gluttony into 5 species or types, which illustrates the various ways one can inordinately attach to food. Latte, eating too expensively. Seduce, eating too daintily or fastidious. Nimus, eating too much. Bebre, eating too soon. Ardente, eating too eagerly or greedily. Quote from Pope Gregory I. Unless we first tame the enemy dwelling within us, namely our gluttonous appetite, we have not even stood up to engage in the spiritual combat. In theological terms, gluttony is most accurately classified as a cardinal sin, not a passive one. It's a cardinal sin because it's of the body. It's trying to pleasure your body. Carnal means body, like carne, meat, flesh, what do you call it? The motive for gluttony. The motive behind gluttony is disordered love for the sensory pleasure of food and drink. As Thomas Aquinas explained, this sin can manifest in 5 ways. Preporite, eating too soon. The motive is impatient, a lack of self-control. Latte, eating too expensively or luxuriously. The motive is pride and attachment to material things. Nemes, eating too much. The motive is simple excess and overindulgence. And dinta, eating too eagerly or greedily. The motive is passionate, ferocious desire for pleasure. Sudius, eating too daintily or fastidiously. The motive is pickiness or excessive concern for quality and presentation, which can stem from pride. In all of these cases, the core motive is a disordered appetite that prioritizes physical pleasures over spiritual and rational order. It's a cardinal sin because it's an act of the flesh seeking gratification in a way that's contrary to God's will. Ways to curb gluttony. From a theological and spiritual perspective, curbing gluttony involves more than just diet. It's a matter of cultivating the virtue of temperance. Temperance is a cardinal virtue of self-control, which moderates the attraction of pleasure and provides balance to the use of created goods. Here are some spiritual and practical ways to combat gluttony based on a Christian tradition. Fasting. This is the primary, most direct spiritual tool against gluttony. Fasting involves abstaining from food or certain types of food for a specific period. Helps to train the will, subdue the desires of flesh, remind us of our dependence on God, not on earthly substance. It's an act of penitence and a form of prayer. Praying before meals, a common practice, helps to put consumption in its proper context. A blessing for God, for nourishment. Praying for strength to overcome temptation is also essential. Mindful eating. This involves paying attention to the food we eat, its taste, and the feeling or fullness. The goal is not only to eat what's needed for nourishment and to appreciate the food without turning to it for an object of excessive pleasure. Charity. Gluttony is often rooted in selfishness. By contract, practicing charity, such as sharing food with the poor, or a simple act of giving thanks for the food you have, helps to reorient one's focus from personal pleasure to the need of others. Reflection. Regularly of reflecting the motivation behind our eating habits can be a powerful tool. Are we eating out of boredom, stress, sadness? Understanding the root cause can help address the issue rather than just treating the symptom. Based on Christian theological tradition, the punishment for gluttony in the afterlife is not a physical snake pit. Instead, it's a spiritual punishment that corresponds to the nature of the sin. In Dante Alighieri's, gluttons are punished in the third circle of hell. They are forced to live in a filthy slush made of freezing rain, black hell, and dirty snow, while being guarded by a three-headed dog, saddled by the rust. The cold, putrid muck and the beast's incessant barking are meant to mirror the glutton's life on earth, where they consumed and wallowed in excess. The punishment is symbolic reversal of their sin. Instead of consuming delicious food and warmth, they're consumed by a foul, cold substance in a putrid environment. The punishment of being forced to eat rats, spiders, toads, and for lower good, a legendary concept. This is not a traditional punishment for gluttony. A major Christian theological works, like Dante's Inferno writings in the Church Fathers, have previously noted the punishment for gluttony in Dante's Inferno is the line of filthy, icy slush, a direct symbolic reversal of the glutton's warm, excessive indulgence. The eating of the vile creature is more commonly associated with sorcery or witchcraft in medieval folklore. However, if we were to create a modern equivalent based on symbolic nature of such a punishment, it would not be a literal act, but a psychological and spiritual one. The core of the punishment is to turn from what was once a source of pleasure and gratification, eating, to a source of disgust and torment. Eating rats, spiders, and toads, the modern equivalent. The modern equivalent would be the experience of a glutton who finds their love of food has become a source of profound misery and degradation. The rats, junk food, and processed craving. Rats are often associated with filth, disease, and scavenging. The modern equivalent is constant compulsion to consume junk food, highly processed snacks, and fast food. The rat-like diet, which initially satisfying, eventually degrades one's physical and mental health. The glutton is forced to consume this junk not by an external demon, by the addiction of their own appetites. The pleasure is fleeting, the lasting result is physical and emotional sickness. And the spiders, anxiety and shame. Spiders can symbolize entrapment and quiet dread. The modern glutton is eaten by spiders of their own shame, anxiety, and guilt. They're caught in a web of compulsive eating, binge and purge cycles, and self-loathing. The venom of the sin is a poison, a poor body image, social isolation, and constant nagging feeling of being out of control. The toads, the ugliness of addiction. Toads are often associated with warts, ugliness, and base earthly desires. The modern glutton is forced to swallow toads in the sense that he must confront the repulsive and humiliating reality of their addiction. They may hide from their eating, feeling disgust at their lack of self-control, being forced to endure the ugly physical and social consequences of their action. The sin itself becomes a source of deep spiritual and psychological ugliness. In this modern metaphorical sense, the glutton is their own tormentor. The punishment is not an external force, but an internal decay and self-destruction that results by giving in to a disordered appetite. The pleasure of food is replaced by the pain of its consequence, the cycle of suffering that embodies the spiritual truth of the medieval punishment.